Okay, so what we will do today is we will discuss the papers and the topics for the course, as we discussed last week that you will do that. I have a lecture prepared for today, which is, which I have put as lecture 4 on the wiki for the course. The lecture is, I actually watched it and it's quite good. So I want you to watch it, okay? You can watch it on almost double speed. So I watched it on double speed. So some parts you can easily watch on double speed. Some things you may need to slow down a little bit. But it basically goes through the topic of academic writing. And there is an extra video which I might have already showed you on doing a literature review. So I will attach that extra video to the material, right? So watch the video, and then what we can do is we can discuss it next week briefly. I don't think a lot of things changed. I wouldn't have much else to say. So most of the things which are covered there are still the same. We haven't discussed in the lecture video, we haven't discussed those, the speech analysis, right? And I didn't actually dive into the discussion on that. So we started the lecture by analyzing why people write. And one of the reasons people write stuff is for entertainment purposes. So you have fiction or whatever you have in entertainment. The other reason is that you want to convince somebody to do something. So politicians do write stuff, and newspapers have some opinions to write about current affairs and so on, and they want to convey some opinions or point of view. And then you have the academic writing. So in academic writing, we often don't use emotions, and we don't use the mechanisms to manipulate somebody else's perceptions. We do that in games. We do that in fiction, we do that in films. We want to kind of control the emotions and control the way particular narrative structure or particular thing influences people, right? So those two analyses are from that point of view. So it is about winning kind of a spoken argument or winning a conversation, but it has kind of a limited applicability in science. We usually avoid that, right? But it's good to know what mechanisms are being used, right? So apart from watching the lecture video, I also want you to watch those two short kind of analysis. We have like a full course run by Stuart Kowalski, who discusses rhetorics. And he uses examples like that to kind of highlight how you can structure your speech, or highlight how you can structure the way you argue your case, to kind of to have an upper hand in a conversation or in a kind of a discourse. It doesn't mean that your arguments are kind of true or valid, right? So what often happens is you have an exercise where you're given a task to convince the other people that they are wrong, and they are trying to convince you that you are wrong, right? And it doesn't matter who is right or who is wrong. It's the way of using the mechanics of arguing to kind of win the particular points for the arguments, right? So you can appeal to emotions, you can appeal to logic, you can appeal to your sense of patriotism and so on. And by doing that, you kind of convey a certain message, right? So politicians do that, and the famous speech when Obama has given after the Bin Laden capture, or the one from the film with what was the film called? Braveheart. Yeah. So those are kind of a nice to analyze, like how it was structured and how they try to get people to think certain way by doing some things, right? Which has nothing to do with science in a sense, right? But some authors fall into the trap, like you need to argue your case, and you're kind of falling into a trap to arguing because of emotions or arguing because of something, right? We often do the argument because of logic, the logic inference, but it's not. Yeah, so you will see from the lecture and from the videos like what I mean, right? And next week, after you watch the lecture, we can kind of discuss some minor points that you might have. So what we will do today, instead of watching the lecture together, we will do the discussion of the topics for this semester and the selection of papers. So in the last week I told you that we have a small sections about the papers which are kind of a low quality. So it's here. So if you find kind of a bad paper, you can link it here, and then we can use it as a point for discussion. Towards the end of the lecture, I used a couple of examples from the list that we have. So we will have more depending on the choice of topics this year, right? So yeah, maybe we go around the room and you will tell me what sort of topics you've selected, right? So what would you like to have covered this year?
I would have liked to cover AI.
Right, yeah.
Primarily because I kind of felt like I maybe don't understand all aspects of it.
Okay.
I have this neural network trained to detect some of the type of knowledge.
Yeah, so I will mark the topics which are kind of for this year, say 2019, okay? And what we will have to do, we'll have to specify exactly what topics are we gonna cover and which papers are kind of contributing, right? So you mentioning neural networks, like all neural networks or specific type of neural network?
That's what I had knowledge.
Okay.
Going in.
Yeah.
I would like to learn maybe more about other types of AIs exist, how the other field looks as a whole.
Right. So kind of a more general overview of the various sub-fields within the AI.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is okay. We have to structure it in a form of a research question. So you're kind of interested in the way the field is structured, like in the taxonomy of the field.
Yeah, what the different subfields are, how they actually work, sort of thing. My knowledge is AI really only neural networks?
No.
No.
It's huge, right? So AI is a very big umbrella term, right? It historically comes from the early days of computing, and well, we could be. I mean, we have to have a certain angle to look at it, right? We cannot spend, because we will have, roughly speaking, 2 to 3 weeks per topic, like if we're really lucky, right? Otherwise, it's just 1 week, right? So in 1 week, what can we do with the topic, right? We have to carve kind of a smaller thing. So you have to isolate like a single question. Let's say we can discuss whether a Turing test is a good representation of AI, right? So if something passes a Turing test and you cannot distinguish it from a human, let's say you're talking with Alexa, right? And you ask her questions and she gives you answers, and you cannot tell if it's fake and somebody in the next room is listening to you and answering you, or if it's a computer. Would you consider that a proper AI, right? That's kind of a Turing test. So we can discuss that, and we can find literature like discussing pros and cons, right? But that's kind of a very narrow thing. We could discuss how it is structured, like how it is divided into different sub domains, but we cannot look into each of them. We can just focus on the taxonomy, like how it is organized.
Yeah, I think the Turing test may be interesting. For this lecture, I kind of looked at the papers stuff. So I looked at some paper with fake news.
Yeah.
And using AI to both generate fake news and make it look real.
Yeah, that's right.
Or detect whether or not the news is fake.
Yeah.
So Turing test angle.
Yeah, fake news and fake videos is a kind of a hot topic recently. We're getting really good at it. So we're getting so good that it's kind of really hard to tell for a human a fake video from a real video. So we could cover that. What are the implications and so on, right? So you know Turing test, right? You know Chinese room? So a small detour from the discussion. So Turing test is like it was proposed by Alan Turing as a way of distinguishing if something is intelligent or not and measuring how, right? So the harder it gets for you to recognize that that's a computer program, the more intelligence you can ascribe to it, right? And in the ideal case, you wouldn't distinguish. You would interact with something like through, like in original days, it was a teletype. It was like a written text going back and forth, right? But in modern times, you could imagine having a Alexa, which you interact like over the voice, or you could even imagine having a face of an actress who is real, who is like mimicking the spoken things, and you interact with her, right, or him, and then you ask questions, and she or he gives you answers, right? And then if you cannot tell if it's fake or if it's real, then you would consider it intelligent, right? So that was the Turing test. And then there was a philosopher who came up with a counter argument, and his counter argument goes like this. Imagine that you're in a room, and the room is full of boxes, and the boxes have a particular pictograms on the shelves, and you can kind of find a particular pictogram, open a shelf, and pick another pictogram from that shelf, right? And there is a small window into the room, right? And through that window, you will get some pictograms, and then you will get them. You will look at them. You will find those in the room. You will open the shelf, pick another pictograms, and give those back, right? So you could kind of hypothetically imagine that those pictograms represent Chinese language, and somebody from outside gives you some pictograms which are questions in Chinese, and then you, by looking into the room and matching the pictograms, you give them an answer, and the answer is intelligent. Like, you're actually giving them reasonable, intelligent answers by doing that, right? Then would you be considered knowing Chinese? Would somebody call you that you know Chinese? If you're doing that and converse with a person outside who converses with you, right? They ask you questions, you give them answers. Would you consider yourself, or would you be considered knowing Chinese? Exactly. So it's similar with the intelligence, right? So machine doing a bit of pattern matching doesn't really do what we would consider kind of intelligence, right? According to that philosopher, at least. But would you consider the room to know Chinese?
Does it hold every possible question and answer, or is it just
kind of a subsection, yeah. So at least to some extent, right? It has to be bound, right?
Maybe it's not understanding Chinese, but that may be kind of like a dictionary. So think encyclopedia.
Yeah. So it is. I mean, there is no right and wrong answer, right? It's just a way of hypothesizing what does it mean to be intelligent, and what does it mean for the machine to be intelligent. And you raised that question before, asking, is the dumb deep neural network really doing anything smart, or just calculating some numbers, and then it appears as if it's very smart and can do a lot of matching or making intelligent decisions, but deep inside what it only do is doing some calculations, right? But then again, maybe what we are doing in our heads is just calculations as well, right? Maybe we are kind of like a very complex computer which processes data, processes input and output, and there is nothing else to it, right? So maybe there is no difference between machine intelligence and our intelligence, right? So if you're coming from more of a computer science background, you would say, yeah, it's plausible. Like we accepted it as a really plausible thing. Whereas if you're coming back from more of an old-fashioned philosophy perspective, they have something called qualia, which is something kind of beyond the senses, something that is kind of more abstract, right? But you know, so again, we can spend a 1 week diving into that, or diving into the Turing test or Chinese room test, or we can dive more into the fake news and fake videos. With news, it's kind of fundamentally difficult, because what is a fake news, right? Like how how would you define a fake news?
Information, or information pertaining to an event that didn't actually happen, but being presented as it did.
Yeah, so I can say Barack Obama was just killed, right? Is it a fake news or not?
Well,
I just made it up, right?
Yeah.
But maybe he just killed, right?
Yeah.
You cannot tell, right? So
Maybe-
things which are
maybe-
made up.
If you get extremely lucky and in 20 minutes you will be, and then suddenly you get asked by the FBI, how did you know?
That's right. But so yes, we have to match like the real world events with something which describes those events, and then if they are kind of correlated, then we say those news are kind of correct. But if they are not correlated, then we say, okay, those were fake news. So made up things. But when you're describing an event, so let's say, okay, so we had a Second World War, right? It happened. Like everybody knows it happened. Like how it happened. What started it? Well, that's kind of really difficult to precisely define, right? You can ascribe particular event as a causal event for this or something else, right? It's kind of up for interpretation. So then is it really a fake news if I say this versus something else? It's really hard to judge, right? So it has some basis in factual reality, but then there is the interpretation of it, which goes on top, right? So of course, some things are clearly false, like this kind of Obama statement. Yeah, considering that nothing happened, it's like completely fake, right? It's very clear to see that. But with the fake news, the whole point is that it's blurred, that it's a little bit unclear, right? You see a lot of advertisement. Is the advertisement always 100% correct? No, it's not. It's almost always fake news, right? They always turn some facts around and they present something like as if it's true, but it's not, right? All advertisement industry is based on fake news in a sense, right? On pushing the reality a little bit to a zone where it's kind of gray area, like, if it's completely false, then it's a bad advertising, right? Good advertising is it's like, yeah, it's plausibly correct, but exactly. So
good advertising is when you ignore that it's fake.
Yeah.
It still catches your eye.
So all the fake washing powder advertisements, they shot the clean things first, then they make them dirty. But in the movie, you see that they're in reverse order, right?
Or the cheeseburger, yeah. You get on the picture, it's not what you get.
That's right. So I don't know. I mean, we can discuss that. I think the interesting one is the fake videos, because it has a very, like, with news, in a sense of a written text, we got used to be kind of critical. Like if we read something that smells like it feels a little bit unjustified or a little bit not correct, we have the kind of internal mechanisms to say, oh, warning bells, it's probably fake, right? But if we see video or if we see some reality outside, we take it for granted that it's true, right? That's why we kind of are confused with a lot of visual illusions and so on, because it's like, operates on very fundamental aspects of how we process information. So if we see a video which is well done and we cannot distinguish that it's fake, like sometimes it's kind of, the timing is not perfect, then you can see, oh yeah, that's fake, right? Or it's kind of animated. But if it's really well done, it's really hard not to believe it, like, yeah?
You also have the subject of fake profiles on social medias and the bots used in that.
Yeah.
And then you need base generation framework in terms of biometrics and identity theft. Interesting cases.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. So we could. So what do you think? Should we talk about it? Should we spend some time reading about the latest technologies for fake videos and how it works?
I think so. I mean, it's kind of a recent development, but I've seen videos where they put a face of an actor upon a different actor.
Yeah, that's right.
It looks kind of ridiculous, but it is kind of for how much longer will video evidence be applicable in court?
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, you have a video of someone doing something, but
it's fabricated, right?
It could be.
Yeah, I watched a kind of a cool ad. I don't know, like randomly I was on Vimeo watching something else, but the follow-up video was like a made-up advertisement with like a crowd of people watching some advertisement and then saying some things about it. And they like make the video like with the people saying things they wanted them to say, and they kind of interviewed the people, and the voice wasn't those people voice, it was just some actor's voice, but the movement of the lips and so on was actually really well done. So it kind of looked kind of legitimate as a kind of a TV show where they asked people and they were saying basically all the good things about this fake thing that they wanted to advertise. Right, so fake videos, because I think it's a little bit beyond just AI. So AI is kind of one aspect of it, right? So we can have a subtopic which is like how AI is used for doing the fake videos. But because there is also a kind of another development, which is all the technology to detect fake videos, right, or fake news. So there is a lot of projects trying to come up with AI methods for detecting something not being legitimate. As I'm saying, like with videos, I think it's kind of a technology, more of a technology-related problem. With news, I think it's more of a social problem, like the way how you define the categories, like what is and what is not acceptable, right? Because we do accept certain amount of fakeness in the news just by the nature of people interpreting it. It's really cool if you speak multiple languages and you watch, and there is an event in the world, and you watch, even in the same language, like you watch the US coverage and UK coverage of particular event. It's like, are you talking about the same event? Right? It's completely different sometimes. So, yep. So we can have that. So we can have kind of an AI aspect and more of like a social aspects, social impact. All right, with the AI itself, what is interesting in the AI? So who else wants AI to be covered? And what exactly? Yeah, okay, so what would you like?
I'm a fan of generational.
Okay, yeah, so kind of evolutionary algorithms. Generational algorithms, yeah. What else?
Unsupervised learning.
Unsupervised learning, that's a cool one, yes. Unsupervised learning techniques, algorithms. So this one, the first one, is inspired by nature. So we have the, Darwinian theory of evolution, which kind of hypothesized of the better adjustment to the environment done through kind of a generational adjustments and kind of a random chance events, right? In the early days, actually in the time of Darwin, he wasn't sure if it's because of the genes or if some traits are kind of passed by learning, right? Later on, we learned that almost always the traits are passed not by the traits you acquire during your lifetime, but because of the mutations and the way it kind of works on a genetic level. But in recent years, there is a kind of an interesting turn that some features are actually passed into the genes because the way you kind of interact with the environment, right? So certain learned traits make you interact with the environment certain way, which turns on and off certain genes, which then is passed to your offspring, right? So in a sense, it is kind of complicated that sometimes it is not just like two levels, the phenotype and the genotype, but sometimes they kind of interact a little bit. And you really see that with some of the primitive bacteria, because if you change the environment a little bit, then the next generation of the bacteria is actually adjusted to the way you've changed the environment. So the way the parents behaved kind of makes them behave certain way, right? So it is quite interesting. So we can talk about this as well. So unsupervised learning is especially important for the huge data sets that we kind of deal with currently. So the supervised learning requires to have kind of a labeled data sets. So you have to tell the computer or somebody, okay, this is like this because, and then they generalize it, that generalize the knowledge. And unsupervised learning is kind of more you interact with the environment and you extract the patterns from the environment directly, right? We don't know, like in terms of the human development, of how much is one or the other. So certain things are definitely evolving because of unsupervised learning and categorizations. Some things require feedback. So some kind of developmental things about humans are because you have the environment kind of giving you the feedback and giving you some hints. But it is hard. For machine learning, unsupervised learning is kind of really exciting, but it's quite hard at the same time. So definitely we can discuss that. So what was the third?
No, I have to agree with this. Unsupervised learning.
Okay, so you were also thinking about unsupervised learning. Yeah, sounds good. All right, so we will have those. What else? What you guys were thinking of?
Yeah, I was also seeing your US and UI bots that you can do.
Okay.
And if we could have some VR and AR on health,
yeah,
it would be even better.
Okay. So let me just find it. Okay, so that's probably so. Yeah, so let's take those. And yeah, we'll say it's 2019 VR, AR, XR. Okay. So we'll have some papers. We can cut them off, but at least we have some starting point. What did we say here? So that one is not part of it. And potentially with health, right? So health. Well-being as well? Or just health?
Both.
Yeah. Okay. And how about you? All right. So sounds good. So we have kind of the list. Can I do this? Yep, I can. Nice. So what we can do is let's spend 10 minutes and all of you will think of a question or exact topic which can be addressed by a single paper, or you find a paper, right? So you have to think of one particular topic which could potentially be addressed by a paper, or you find a paper which addresses a single topic which is already a paper, and then we put that in, right? So within those areas, think of something kind of small enough that it's like a single paper, right? If you want yourself to come up with something, then come up with something yourself and then try to find papers which are fitting that topic, or search and find a paper which sounds interesting and covers something within those domains, right? And then we'll have, yeah, like 7 or 8 papers, and we will put them as a list, as a kind of a starting point. It doesn't mean we have to cover those papers, but it is sort of like the initial seed for discussing, right? So I will stop for 10 minutes and you do that, and then we put that in and discuss. and I will bring it over. Okay, so how do you source the sources? How do you search for the relevant things? Google it? Yeah, what else? Stringer link, yeah. What else?
Oreo.
Say it again?
Oreo.
Yeah. Science Direct, yeah.
We pass in the dynamic search, so quotes and more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so then after you do the search, what else do you do? Yeah. Yeah. What else?
What's still interesting after the abstract and conclusion, I'll tend to read the whole article.
Yeah, do you check references?
No, I don't. But I know we have a checklist about specific research topic and sourcing down cited resources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you're using Science Direct or some of the search engines, do you check how something is cited? Do you prefer something highly cited or something not cited?
I prefer highly cited.
Yeah. Do you try to find the latest version of the paper? So let's say you did some search, you find an author which has a particular topic, and then it's from 2008, and you say, oh, I wonder if they have something newer than that, and you check the homepage or check the same author, what within that topic, whether they have something later than 2008. You do that? You can do that.
I guess we would presume the search engines will reference the newer version.
Yeah, but sometimes someone publishes something like in 2008, and then they expand it, have more experiments, and they have newer version, right? So they may have 2014 version of a concept which you can read in 2008 paper as well, but it's expanded. Sometimes you need to read both. It's about the same thing, but kind of a different, right? Sometimes it happens that a newer paper says the other paper was wrong. This is correct. It happens as well. So it's good to kind of check like the history of something, of an idea or a development of some sort. Okay, you finished?
Well, you can edit.
No, I don't want to edit. I want to refresh the page and to see if you have it already. Okay, so what I've added, over the last, say, 6 years or so, there was a development in terms of AI being used for playing video games. And the interesting thing is that the researchers took the screen with all the pixels and didn't tell the AI anything apart from the pixels, right? So all the AI is given is just the pixels. And then if the AI can use the controller, right? The game controller, so you can send inputs to the game controller and get feedback at the end of the game, what happened, whether you scored something or whether you lost completely, right? So you can imagine, like, it's a hopeless task, right? You kind of like a blind person getting kind of millions of pixels, and you have no idea what's going on, and you kind of moving the controller, and what's going to happen. Most of the time you get like 0 and you just failed, right? Miserably, right? So the task feels like incredibly hard to get something useful going, right? But they did manage to teach it to play a number of old 8-bit video games, and in most of them the AI could train itself to a point where it could beat the human players, right? So this is kind of a really fascinating. So those 3 papers from, this one and this one are from this DeepMind group, which was doing this research. And the same group is behind the chess playing AI and the Go playing AI. So you probably heard last year there was this big announcement where they had this competition with the DeepMind playing the best Go player, and it won, I think, like 6-1 or something like that. It actually win majority of the games. This one, I think it's in similar, but I haven't read this paper, so I'm not sure if it's a better review, but that's the newest paper, right? This one is 2003, which is quite old. I think I got the date right. And then it might be 13 and 15, to be honest. Let me just double check. Yeah, that one's definitely 15. Are you editing? You can change the...
Yeah, I'm not sure I have it right.
Yeah.
I've been looking for it.
Yeah, anyway, so I will correct the dates. The thing is it unsupervised learning? How would you classify it? So it doesn't tell the AI anything apart from the final score, right? Yeah, so there is this term called reinforcement. So it is kind of not supervised learning, but it is not completely unsupervised neither. It's kind of in between. So it's a kind of a different category, right? So you're giving it some feedback at the end, but you don't tell it like what it's doing, it's good or not, right? So for example, if you were, let's say we, what game we could use? Let's say we're playing chess, okay? So initially you have a certain score mechanic which says, well, you have kind of a 50-50 chance of winning, right? And then you're making a move, and after every move, the computer can recalculate what are your chances of winning, right? So if you did a move which resulted in you losing a queen, now your chances of winning kind of drop dramatically. So you tell AI, okay, the last move you've done is like really crappy or really bad, right? And you do that, right? That would be kind of supervised learning, although it is still within the category of reinforcement, right? And then the extreme case would be you tell it nothing until the game is over and you say you lost, right? And play again. And then there is, hundreds of moves which lead to either win or lose condition, and then you tell it, oh, now you won, right? And the AI has to work out how to play to win and how to play not to lose, right? Or what was leading to the lose condition. So reinforcement kind of goes from very little feedback at the end to kind of a feedback through the process, right? So we often use some form of environment where you, for example, collect food or collect water, and when you're doing stuff, you need food and water and kind of expenditure, some energy. And then if the agents are doing kind of well, they live longer. If they do poorly, they kind of die quickly, right? And then by the actions, they get kind of a feedback, okay, if you move this way, you found water, that is kind of good for you, and then so on, right? So you can, you don't tell it what is a good or bad choice. You give it a kind of a good or bad outcome of their decisions, but they have to make decisions themselves, right? And then typically what happens is you have some statistical model kind of calculating, okay, if I do this, I was more likely to get a reward than if I was doing this when I was more likely to get a punishment, right? But this is sort of undeterministic. Sometimes doing the same thing, again, will lead to punishment, right? So you have this kind of you don't have labels, you don't have kind of a training set which categorizes things into the way it should be done, but you have kind of a feedback, positive or negative feedback into the process, right? So I kind of kept it under the unsupervised learning, but those, they use a mixture. It's a mixture of reinforcement learning and unsupervised learning. There is one other thing I wanted to show you. So yeah, it's here. So there was this announcement last year. A group of researchers was doing AI to play poker, and they've made the AI to play poker, and they actually trained it with like real humans, and then they use online casinos to play with real players, and they were winning, right? They actually earned almost like $2 million using the bot to play to play poker. So it was kind of interesting because it started a debate whether casinos should ban bots, right? And how to detect that it's a bot, right? So they started to have in the rules of the, you know, that it's illegal for players to use bots and blah, 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 right? But the interesting thing is that they were quite successful. This short article kind of, yeah, it's not a research article, it's like a news article. Which kind of specifies some of the challenges for training AI to kind of operate in a real world environments. In a sense, it's still an online casino, but and then like a few days ago there was another news article. So this happened like last year, right? A year ago in March, and then a few days ago there was another news article saying that the poker playing robot was hired by Pentagon. So US military was really interested in the technology, and they bought a contract with the company which was behind these poker playing robots for making strategic decisions and so whatnot, right? And they have kind of a contract for 10 million US dollars to work on military purposes, right? So this is kind of very, they are related, right? The game playing robots and this one are kind of related in a sense of being able to learn from sensory information. Although this one is also quite interesting because there is, of course, you have to do the math, but you have to factor in the human factors, like how other players are playing, right? And this way of being able to reason about other players' behavior is very fundamental to strategic decision making in military, right? So that aspect is the most interesting, not actually the math behind the playing with the odds of certain things, although that is also important, right? So if you, yeah, it is quite interesting how some of the decisions are made in the kind of crisis situations or in military settings, that they have to always have a quantifiable like number associated with it, right? So what is the, there is a number of how likely it is that the Russian will invade Norway, right? There is a number and the politicians are using it for making some decisions, right? Those numbers are kind of almost always quite arbitrary in a sense that you don't know, right? It's like really unscientific in a sense, but it is somewhat quantifying some things which are really hard to quantify, right? So then playing with odds on the numbers and so on is kind of interesting as well. So it is quite, yeah, this highlights that if you knew about this a year ago, you probably would have known that that's gonna happen, right? That something like this gonna spark some interest with military. So, you know, is this a news? Not really. It's a news, right? It's kind of a predictable thing if you knew this, but not many people knew that. You know, there is this headline is more interesting than the previous headline, right? So it kind of escalates. So you often have that. You have like small news which nobody really cares about, another small news, and then you have the big news, right? But the big news is kind of a consequence of the smaller news anyway, right? All right, so those, you can check it out. Like those things are kind of related to the stuff which we have here, and we could have some articles about the poker playing robot here as well, in a sense, right? I don't know like what technology they've used behind and how it differs from the DeepMind neural networks that these guys are using. So yeah, so one point is that classifying things exactly into boxes sometimes is hard. We kind of should have a box which is like unsupervised learning / reinforcement learning to put some of the papers there. The other thing is that the mechanics of sourcing. So as I as I said, you should check. Like I try to find the latest paper from them, and that's the 2015 one. Like I will change the date. So sometimes they have what you could do is you should always check references, and you should check if they are referring to their previous work, because sometimes it's good to see how the idea evolved, what they've used. And it also sometimes helps you to find the founding thing, right? So you have an idea and you say, I want to check if somebody worked on it, right? And you dig the literature, and it turns out that there is a paper from 2015 which is similar to your idea, right? But they reference a paper which is, 83. And you read that paper and say, oh man, that's exactly my idea, right? That's exactly what I want to do, right? So you don't need to reference 2015 or 13 paper, you reference the one which is the actual source of the idea, right? You have to kind of dig deeper into the founding thing which actually started something. And then they publish it. And then usually there is a bit of quiet, and then other people will have built on top of it. And then some of them become kind of popular, right? So that happened with Darwin actually as well, right? So it's not like Darwin was a genius and he did a lot of work with the animals and so on, but some of the idea were actually at the same time being developed by other people, right? It just happened that he had the very high ranked position with the British Science Academy, and his paper, even though he was later than somebody else's, was more promoted, right? And we know now all about Darwin, but actually it's like the fame is not because of the work, it's because of other circumstances in a sense. So if you dig deeper, you will realize that some of the hereditary mechanisms and so on were not done by him, were done by other researchers whose names, like, you may or may not know. Like, do you know Mendel? That name resonates something? Yeah, so he actually did the genetic work on the beans to discover that the way the hereditary mechanisms are done through genes, right? Everybody thinks it was Darwin, but it wasn't. It was Mendel, right, who developed that concept. But he's not that well known, right? So anyway, you need to dig. You need to dig deeper and kind of extract the source for a particular information. What will happen is we will have a list of papers and some ideas here for discussing the some of the concepts, but for your arguing and for your essay writing, we cannot deal with a topic which is big, right? So for example, those papers which we have, those are results of, let's say, half a year of research work, right? And they are usually, 8-10 pages long, right? Those are too big for us to exercise our writing skills. So we have to do something on a very small topic, right? We have to pick something that you can express an idea on, like, a page, right? Not more than that, right? And you argue your case. So what I want you for this week is you will go over the lecture, like the one that I told you. You will check what is difference between argument and opinion, and how do you make kind of a good argument. And then you will fill in those of you who hasn't submitted the papers, you will do that. And we will use it as a basis for discussing stuff within that area, but not necessarily that scale, right? You have to pick something relatively small, right? Which you can explore on a single page. So it has to be like a very tiny question or tiny research problem that you can provide some evidence for, that is true or that is false, right? Or and you will try to make it into an argument instead of making an opinion, right? Yeah, we will use the examples from next week, so I'm not gonna dive into that today. And what you need is a title which actually is specifying what it is about, right? So the title is the most important part, because it kind of, you know, just by reading a title, you may see, is it relevant for my work or not, right? And then you have to have a little bit of a problem statement, what it is about. So the title is one thing, but the title is kind of very small and concise. And then your actual problem statement or kind of description is the first thing that you have to present. And then you present the arguments, and then you conclude. So, and you try to do that, as I'm saying, like between half a page to a page, right? Try to keep it really short. So what we will do next week, we will look into some of the essays that we had last year. So you'll get an idea of what type of problems people were doing. And we will try to come up with some ideas or brainstorm of some ideas for within the areas that you specified, right? So, yeah, so what we could do, because we already have quite a bit about AI, maybe what we do next week is AI, okay? So all of you will check the papers that we have here. If you want to bring some extra topic or extra paper, bring it into that area. And we will discuss some small things, some problem kind of seeds, which can be explored as an essay within the AI area. And I will, like we haven't done AI last year, so I cannot show you examples of kind of AI essays from last year, but I can show some other examples, and we will kind of follow from that. So yeah, I told you before that we used to have the serious games course, because some of you are taking both courses, right? We used to have serious games course and this course being similar in a sense that in this course you were arguing kind of in a written form, and in the other course you were arguing kind of actually using rhetoric, like standing in the room and arguing your case. So because we're not having that anymore, it might be also useful for you to either identify rhetoric structures in the papers that you're reading, because sometimes the authors are using something which is non-scientific. It's not common, but you may be lucky to find something. Or think what you can do to argue something using rhetoric, even though you're not supposed to, but how could you argue a particular point if you were trying to convince the reader to your point of view, right? So what could you use to strengthen your kind of research arguments by appealing to their sense of something or to their emotions to kind of strengthen your argument, right? So check the, oops. Yeah, check some of the structures which are kind of discussed in those two videos, and then we will, yeah, as I'm saying, kind of research articles are not great. Sometimes you have a blog post, or sometimes you have like a Medium article, and they often do that. They often appeal to like common sense or something that is completely irrelevant to the arguments at hand, right? But they strengthening their point of view, and they trying to convince the reader to their perspective by using some extra tricks. So for research articles, it's very uncommon to find it. But if you're reading about the topic, if you're reading about those AI or things in a common, AI is not the great example either. You often need that for some kind of topics which don't have a clear answer, right? Yeah, so the one which was used in the lecture video last year was the one about whether Apple locks the users in by some of the mechanisms they use, right? So is Apple as a company trying to lock in users, right? Yes, it is kind of a, you can kind of investigate it, but it's a very difficult topic, right? It's a kind of very multi-dimensional, right? So in a single blog post, you cannot really dive into all the details. So you have to shorten some things, and you have to appeal to some auxiliary things to make your case, right? So if you have kind of a topic which is too big, or topic that is somewhat controversial, that doesn't have a clear answer, then usually people use rhetoric to kind of swing the reader one way or the other, right? Okay, so I think that will be it. I will ask you to fill in the course topics, those of you who have not provided one. Try to find something about the fake videos as well, and put them here. If we have multiple papers, what we will do is we will kind of star rate them, right? So think which paper was the best, and then we all discuss, and then we will highlight the best papers, and we will mark the ones which were not that relevant kind of as optional, right? Yeah, we need more for this one, for VR, AR.
I think I have edit rights.
Okay, you don't have edit rights?
Okay.
So if you press the request access button, then I will be able to grant you access. Yes. So. Then you will have access. Yep. So.
I'm editing.
Yeah, you're editing. Good. When it happens that, okay, so if he's editing and you open the page and you're editing as well, and then when you save and you haven't saved yet, when you press save, it will tell you, oh yeah, somebody else was editing, right? So then you have to open in a new tab, the new version, and do a manual merge and save your new version, right? If you force to save your version, you will kind of kill his changes, right? His changes will still be in the tracker because it tracks the changes, but they will be gone. So if you don't merge, you will overwrite his changes, right? So that the socially acceptable behavior is you just open a new tab, you see what he changed, and you just merge his changes with your current edits, and then you commit, right? Then you save. If, as I'm saying, like if you manage to save it overwriting his changes, like he can still merge his changes because they are still saved in a kind of change set. Because behind the scene, the system is still using Git to keep track of the saves. But it is kind of really not doing the merges correctly, in a sense. Most of the time in a text files, the Git merges are kind of seamless. They work really well. Okay, so you have access, you know what to do. Check the video. And then next week what we will do, we will discuss AI, and we will discuss some of the past essays to see how people chose the topics and how much they wrote. Christopher might have told those of you who are using serious games that we will have like a system for submitting the essays. The system is kind of built for questions and answers, but it also used for kind of writing small piece and getting feedback. So you can kind of review somebody else's piece, right? So we'll see how it works. We use that system for the last 3 years, and it kind of works reasonably well. The thing is that it's written in Angular and with Node, and it turns out to be a nightmare in maintenance, right? Because every year there is a new version of all the dependencies and all the UI things, and like every year, even though we're not changing anything, we have to update everything, right? So that's a kind of a word of caution that even though Node and Angular are great to start with, they are a little bit moving target all the time, and you keep updating your stuff, even though you're not changing the logic of the application. So I think I will have to update it for this year as well. And on the repo, I'll get some warnings that we're using some old dependencies which have security vulnerabilities and so on. But yeah, so that will be for the next week. Any questions? Is it better to have those two classes back to back?
Yeah.
All right. Great. So that's it for today.
Yeah. I'm going to.
All right. Great. Thank you.
I'm editing now.